What God has done with my pain.
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 Welcome to What God Has Done with My Pain. Today we have Stacie joining us. What an incredible woman of God. We've only spoken on the phone and been able to kind of communicate back and forth of how we were going to do this interview. And I just am already so incredibly excited about everything that you're about to share, and just your love for God, throughout our interaction is just so bright and full of love in the spirit. So I'm just really excited to jump in. And in order to jump in, I'm just going to go ahead and ask, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, where are you currently located, or where are you from? What are you up to nowadays? And what is Stacie now?
Well, I'm Stacie, and thank you. That was very kind, what you just said. Um, my husband and I are currently in North Carolina. I am a hairstylist. I'm from upstate New York, and just, I guess that's the short story. We're about to get into
Yeah.
the long one, so we'll start
Yes.
there.
Yeah. During our phone call, one of the things you kept saying was, I'm not going to get into it now because I want to save it for the podcast, which, of course, I really love that, because you're just like, you don't get one drop of anything until I get on the podcast so that I can, and I love that because it's going to be my reactions are going to be very authentic on here. And my questions are going to be just right off the bat as we're talking. And so let's start early on. Let's talk about what it was like for little Stacie as a child. What was your childhood like? You said you were from New York. What was all that like? Did you grow up knowing about God? Did you grow up in a house that had some, values that carried on what we learned from the Bible and church? Or did you grow up in a household that knew of God and believed in God, but didn't necessarily practice as much as other households do? What was your childhood like?
When when I was younger, when I was a young girl, I from, the very, very early stages until about age 5 or 6, there was not that was my dog. There was
You're good.
not a, there was not a strong presence. Um, my parents split at that time. Before that, I remember my dad being gone a lot, and whenever he was home, I feel like there was just always conflict. And I love
Mm,
my father. This is something we'll get into later, but God has completely restored that relationship, and I love my dad.
mm,
But when we were younger, things were very different. And I don't remember a lot of Jesus happening
mm,
from either parent. And when I was 5, I remember my parents got in this huge fight, which I just remember trying to stand in between them like this and like push them apart and say, stop
mm.
fighting, stop fighting. I thought I could fix it.
Yeah.
And my someone pushed someone. I'm pretty sure my dad pushed my mom based on how she reacted.
Mm,
But I also couldn't see above me. I was trying to separate
yeah.
them. And when they started pushing each other, I fell under the dining room table. I hit my head, and when I got up, the only thing I remember is kind of seeing like my mom against the wall. And this is so
Mm,
hard for me to share because I love my father so
mm,
much. Um, but this is the truth. I just remember him holding her there very aggressively, and I remember it being in this area. And once things came down and calmed down, um, I remember this part's all very blurry, but I remember my mom went into the kitchen, and then something physical happened between them, and she told everyone to run upstairs and go into my brother Stephen's room once she kind of
mm,
got away from it all. So we all went upstairs and locked the door, and then my dad was escorted out by the police. A few months later, I remember seeing my mother sitting in the same chair she always sat in, and she was reading a book. And I said, "What are you reading?" And she said, "Well, this is the Bible." And that's when I remember there being a shift and
Mm.
I said, I didn't understand how big the Bible was. I didn't understand that it wasn't a book, it was a library,
Mm.
and
Yeah, yeah.
so I asked her, I said, well, are you almost done? And because I had I had no clue, and she said, no, not yet. It's going to be a while until I'm done. And I said to her, which now I look back, I bet it was kind of a source of accountability for her. I said, well, let me know when you finish it. And every day that I saw her sitting there with it, I would go up to her and say, did you finish yet? Are you almost done yet? Are you almost done yet? And because I
Wow.
wanted to know what it was about. And
Mm.
and it's crazy, they say out of the mouth, so the Bible says out of the mouth of babes. And I was so
Yeah.
eager. No other book she read do I ever remember asking
Yeah.
about as much as I asked about that one. And that's where we started to feel a shift. Um, and
Wow.
that was a pretty intense shift. From there, that point forward, we actually lost our house. And we lost our house. I don't know how it happened. I was so young. Some people say it was my mother's fault. Some people say it was my father's fault. I'm sure it was accumulation of
Mm.
just
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone is truly to blame. It was just the circumstance we had been handed. But we lived in upstate New York in the Albany area, and it's pretty cold up there for a large portion of the year. When we lost our home, we we ended up homeless in a sense. So my mother's friend, I believe her name was Mary Ann, she let us use her pop-up camper. And
Oh,
it was
wow.
very small. It had one bed, and it was me, my sister, and then my two brothers and my mother. So there was five of us in this single bed home, um, with barely a bathroom. And a lot of the
Mm.
time we had to cook our food outside, and there wasn't great air conditioning, nor was there very good heat.
Yeah.
So it was definitely an
Yeah.
interesting experience. And I just remember how fun my mother made it. She
Mm.
just said we were camping, and through the summer, I really thought we were
Yeah.
until we hit the peak of winter. And it was very, very cold. This was probably January in upstate
Mm.
New York. And looking back on it now and remembering the things that my mother said, she was friends with the owner of the campground. So they
Yeah.
let us stay there past when it was open.
Mm.
But I can only assume that after a certain time, he said, okay, everything's getting really snowed in. I can't plow. So we had to
Mm.
leave that spot. And we ended up at this woman, her name was Pat Gagnon. She had a farm and she had an RV on her farm and she had her house as well. And so we went from the pop-up camper, we felt like it was an upgrade. And so we went from
Yeah.
this tiny little pop-up camper to this RV that had three bunk beds, and then it had another bed where my mom slept, and sometimes one of us would sleep in there with her.
Mm.
My brother Steve, I remember him kind of going from, he was older, so he would kind of go to friends' houses a lot, I'm sure, to get away.
Mm.
And kids just do that at that age anyway.
Yeah.
Um, so we were there and we had Thanksgiving with her. And on the really cold nights, I remember we would be in the house. And then the other nights we would be in the RV and things like that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. Wow.
that was kind of the start of my life. That was
Wow.
from age, you know,
Yeah.
I guess
Very
baby to around 8 or 9 years old.
yeah. really, really early ages. What
Hmm.
was it like? I mean, I know you mentioned that she said that you guys were camping, but what was that like going from having a home to now living in like a pop-up camper and kind of to that realization of like, wait a minute, like this might be a little bit more than camping. Because I imagine that you internalized a lot because little kids think a lot and they have a lot of questions. What was that like during that time as well, like inside of little Stacey's head?
At one point, I realized we didn't have a house.
Mm,
At first, I was not processed. I had not processed it. I really thought we were just camping for a really long
yeah.
time. And but eventually, once school started and things like that, I started to realize that we didn't have a home.
Mm,
Um, but I didn't think about it in a negative way during that time. I definitely later on into adulthood, I it kind of affected the way I looked at things that I had. Um,
mm,
and I was always very resourceful and a little bit cheap. Yeah, I was always like,
mm,
well, we can get that for this. Like, I know we can. It was always like
yeah.
that survivor mindset
Mm,
of, no, we don't have to spend the money on that. Like, we can go do this, we can do that, we can do XYZ.
yeah.
But for me, being younger at that time, it was a little weird, like cooking our food outside some days, and the heat during the summer was definitely intense at times. And then
Mm,
when we were the only people at the campground, it felt a little eerie. I think that's when things
mm,
definitely started to sit in, like, why are we the only ones here?
yeah,
Why are the
yeah.
other kids gone? Um, Zena, come here. Come here. Go lay down. I'm sorry.
No, you're
Go lay
fine.
down.
For a
Lay
second,
down
I was
all
like, do
the
you want me
way.
to come through the camera?
I know, it's okay. She's a rescue, so she gets like that. But if I don't
Oh,
stop her, she'll just keep going.
no, it's precious.
Um,
Can't really hear her because this platform I use is incredible at
oh,
blocking like
that's so
background
good.
sounds. Yeah, so you're
Okay,
good.
I won't worry about it as much then. If you start to hear her, let me know.
I will. So far, she's been great though. But yeah,
Okay,
you were
that's good.
saying that you were coming to that realization like no one else is here. Why
Yes,
are we the only ones here? Wow.
yes, and it definitely got pretty weird. And then for a long time, we weren't allowed to tell my dad where we were staying. And
Mm,
I do know why, as much as he probably wouldn't admit it. Um, there were times when he would kind of just show up when we lived at our first home.
mm-hmm.
And I look back on my mother's reactions and some of my older siblings, and it was very apparent that he wasn't supposed to be there at that time. Like,
Yeah.
it was an inappropriate time for him to show up. It was overstepping of boundaries and things like that. But in my father's defense, he also didn't, he wasn't fully aware, at least that's how he's expressed it to me. He wasn't fully aware that we were experiencing
Mm,
that kind of hardship.
yeah.
So, and I don't know where the truths and I don't know where the hills intersect. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
this has been a 25-year thing with our family. Like,
Yeah.
it gets talked about, people freak out, and
Yeah.
so I've just
Yeah.
came to my own conclusions based on my experience and just
Mm,
watching the adults and everything that happened when I was growing up. It was definitely hard. It was strange. I remember going to school, and I was never the popular kid anyway. You know, my hair tended to be a little greasier and things like
mm,
that. And definitely, and I didn't think anything of it. I felt like I had everything I need, and my mother definitely tried her
yeah.
absolute hardest to do what she needed to do. But I mean, you're a single mom. She didn't get her GED until her adulthood. It was
Yeah.
actually
Mm.
my Barbara. I call her my Barbara. It's my mother's best friend. Her and I are still very
Aw.
close. And before my mother passed away, um, my Barbara found out on a whim because my mom was having a really hard time getting a good job. And this was
Yeah.
the early 2000s, so you could still get a career-based job with
Mm.
just a high school diploma. It
Yeah.
wasn't as,
Mm.
hardcore the way it is now, where you have to have a degree in this, that, the third. You could still make enough to get by
Yeah.
with just a high school diploma. But my Barbara found out that she didn't have one. So she encouraged her. She did go back and get her GED
Mm.
eventually. And I don't know when all that happened. I just remember, when to bring it back to the camper, I remember being there. And then when we left and we moved into Pat Gagnon's property, um, I just remember it was very interesting, to
Mm.
say the least. I didn't really know how to feel. I was being told one thing. Some of those things I'm
Yeah.
sure were for my protection. And then I was experiencing
Completely
another.
different thing.
Yes. So it
Yeah.
was very confusing because I was happy, but I also kind of knew that we didn't have what we were supposed to have.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very conflicting
Yeah.
to experience.
Yeah. And you were talking about like this was from an early age to about 8 or 9. So now we're getting into like the preteen, like that angsty time to teenage years, which not only
Mm-hmm.
are we super impressionable and wanting to please and fit in and all of these things, but we're also adapting to other people's personalities or aesthetics, whatever we see we want to do. Um, so what was that like for you transitioning? Like that was your foundation, right? Because growing up, whatever happens in our background is kind of like building us to be, like you said, you became a little bit more of like, this is what we can spend on. This is what we're going to have to store away, survival mode. Um, so what was it like now that you're becoming a teenager? You're getting a little bit older, obviously becoming way more self-aware. What was your Where were you headed? Like what was your mindset? Were you more into that worldly mindset? Was it um you started to dive in a little bit more into Christianity or the Bible, or is there any direction that you started to take? Can you see what decisions you made or what you were up to? Because I mean, I think it's fair to say that anyone from the ages of 13 to 19, there's a lot of questionable things that we do because our frontal lobe isn't completed. Even by the time of 25, you look back and you're like, now I have so
Yes.
much clarity.
Yes. Yes, that 25 mark is definitely, I can identify with that. And it's so funny, right? Just not to get off, I'm going to answer your question, of course,
No,
but
but you're good. Yeah,
it's
go
so
ahead.
funny when we're 19, 18, we're like, "Oh, we've got it." And now I'm 26 now, and I'm like, I don't have it. Like I'm fine. I'm fine. By the grace of God, we have everything and more than I could ever ask
Mm,
for. But I'm like, I don't know everything.
yeah.
I know very little. So it's funny that you say that. But to go back to that age, that was this was such a moment of peace because
Mm,
we actually got a house. Eventually, it
mm.
was a lot smaller. We went from this historic home that my father had bought, which was actually, um, we'll have to talk about that. It was haunted. It was,
Oh my
it was
gosh.
possessed. Like, and I don't mean like how people say, like just a chill spirit, lost spirit. I don't know what God has like, but
Mhm.
we know the Bible says, looking back now, that like, oh, familiar spirits, stuff like that, that's not a thing. Those are demons.
Yeah. Yeah.
That house I grew up in, I truly believe a lot of the reason that so much happened was because the demonic was present. Um,
Wow.
Like I got
And I
pushed down
before
the
you
stairs.
continue,
I got all
I
kinds of
just
stuff like all
I wanna
crazy.
I wanna I wanna I wanna verify or not verify. Well, I want to back you up basically on what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because as you're getting into this, I just want to say I have had one other person tell me a story, and I'm going to tell it. She's actually been on the podcast. Um, but this is a while ago. She's from season one.
Mhm.
When I first met her, we were at church and she was talking, and we were having this breakfast there because there's a woman's event, or no, a freedom event. And she was telling me she moved into a trailer and she was experiencing really weird nightmares. I'm talking about like dreams that were just not of her. They were very sexual dreams. They were just all those dreams were very based on just all things sexual, all this stuff. And someone had given her advice like, "Oh, you should probably do like a spiritual cleansing, like pray over the place, just go about the home praying." And she said that like when she was doing that, her dogs like started from the back and started to chase something out, like they were barking at something particularly.
Yes.
But she was just saying that like later she found out that the previous owner had just some really bad extra activities that he would do that you can only imagine probably invited even more of that, even more of those demon based type of things. Because I
Right.
think we've all heard it like if you're not necessarily prideful, but if you have this one thing that can be demon led, right? And so if he was doing all of these things and this was an open space to be doing them, and then he leaves or was arrested, I can't remember the story, so don't quote me exactly, but and then she comes in and she's because she was just like, I don't understand these dreams. She was like, at first I was wondering if God's trying to tell me something, but then
Right.
over further investigation and prayer, like it really was just believed that there's something here that she just had to keep praying and praying and praying to get it away. So when you're saying this, like I very much like I agree, like the Bible has made that very clear. When it comes to like the whole like spirits and familiar spirits, I really think that it makes it very clear that it's just like they say, Satan hides himself as light. So yeah, you were saying you got pushed down the stairs.
Yes, and that was just one of many things that happened. So I guess we'll back up to that house, right? And then we'll go on and talk about ages,
Yeah.
10, well, 8 to like 10, 11. So in that house, a plethora of things happen, and every sibling has had an experience, whether it was just one or it was multiple. Um, my brother Steven had crazy experiences in his room, but I'll just speak of myself right now. Um, I had been pushed down the stairs. There was a time I was laying in bed. My sister and I shared a room, and the room was very large. And just a
Mm,
little history of the house. For about 70 years, the house was a funeral home.
mm,
So it was built, it was a historic home. It was built during the Civil War times. And I think I'd have to look it up again. Someone important lived there. I don't know if it was the founder of the town that I grew up in. I can't remember, but it was a historic house. And it was a funeral home for 70 years. My mother's bedroom, actually, the white doors that like push all the way in, the French
yeah.
doors,
Yeah.
that was her bedroom door.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so like that was
Gosh.
like the viewing room.
Mm,
And I didn't know that until I had been in a funeral home myself, later in life. And
yeah.
I saw
Yeah.
those doors and I was like, oh my gosh, that was in my
Yeah.
mother's bedroom.
Yeah.
Um, but I would get pushed down the stairs. There was a
Mm,
woman who passed away in my room. And at the time, I thought it was her. Now I know that that was deception. It was probably an evil spirit. But when I was in my bedroom, I was watching Rugrats. I remember this very
oh,
vividly. It was
a
like,
classic.
yes, but it was like new episodes were coming out. That's like the time
Mm,
period, right? It's like early 2000s. I'm chilling in my room. And I'm maybe 7 because it was like right before we lost the house, is when I
mm,
remember because there was a shift. I was like maybe 7 at the time.
mm,
And so I'm sitting in my room and I hear this like scratching, like like
Mm.
someone like running their hands like down a wall, right? Like
Yeah.
their fingernails.
Yeah.
I have four brothers and two sisters. So my first thought was not ghost. My first
Yeah.
thought was my brother Steven's in the closet and he's
Yeah.
trying to scare me.
Yeah.
So, because he did stuff like that all the time, him, his friends, everything, like they just tormented us. It was like basic early
Yeah.
2000s, 90s siblings where
Mm-hmm.
like, that's just what you did. Okay. So I'm like, get out of my closet, Steven. Like, I bet it's you. Get out. I'm gonna tell mom.
Mm.
And then I got the noise calmed down, so I got distracted by the TV again. I'm watching Nickelodeon, and I'm just sitting there, and then I hear it again, but this time I hear like a
Mm.
gasp for breath, like
Yeah. Yeah.
like a struggle. And I was like,
Mm.
Steven, you're not scaring me. I'm like mad, like super
Yeah.
mad.
Yeah.
I'm like, get out of the closet. Stop. Like, don't do that. And then I got
Yeah.
distracted again. Same thing, watching TV. And then I hear it again, only it's like a little bit louder and it's like a murmuring. So it's like the
Mm.
scratching and but then it's almost
Mm.
like it's like trying
Yeah.
to say
Yeah.
something. And I kid you not, I, I can't make this up. Okay. I remember this is a core memory. And I
Mm.
did not sleep in that room for months
Mm.
after what happened. So I stood up. I'm like super upset. And I'm like,
Mm.
get out of my closet. I'm going to tell mom. I'm going to tell on
Mm.
you, all these things.
Yeah.
Like, get out of my room. Super mad. I'm like ready to
Yeah.
fight, right?
Square
All of a
up.
sudden, so it was a walk-in closet. It was like a room pretty much.
Okay.
And the light was not on in there because it was the evening. I was just watching TV. And I kid you not, if this is the frame of the closet, right? This
Yeah.
hand, old, purple, dirty fingernails.
My God.
This hand came around like this,
Mm.
and I just watched for a second, and it looked like it was about to pull, like the
Yeah.
wrist started to come out. Once I saw the wrist coming out, I bolted. I
Yeah,
ran
girl.
downstairs because I'm like, I
Mm.
don't know what kind of trick this is. I don't know what kind of trick they're trying to play on me. Like, but I'm scared now. I'm
No.
freaked out. I'm scared.
Mm.
And I ran downstairs, and everyone was in the living room. Every
Wow.
person in that house was
Wow.
in the living
The
room.
living room.
So I run
Wow.
downstairs. I'm freaking out. I'm looking around. Everyone's here. And so
Yeah.
I just started sobbing and
Wow.
freaking out and like,
Girl.
I'm not okay. And my mom's like, what is
Mm.
happening? I'm like, duh, duh, duh. I'm like having a panic
Mm.
attack. I don't know what to do. And I would not sleep in my room for
I don't
about
blame you.
2 months. And I
Yeah.
couldn't.
You know,
That was
I
the worst, I think, the worst experience I had in that
I think
house.
you saying this is so, I think, so important, because
Yes,
we don't
we
talk
don't.
about evil spirits and how real they can be, and how they can attack on a family and prey on a family, and they really will
Yes,
plant seeds and they will
yes,
break. Because like what the Lord brought together is a beautiful covenant to multiply, to have children and to have
yes.
kids, and what the enemy wants to do is to completely obliterate that image completely. And I love that you're sharing this because fear and all, and whether this was, before your father, left or even
It was
after he
before.
left.
No, this was
Yeah.
before. There was
So
a
there's,
shift in the home the minute my mother opened that Bible, and I'll have to talk about that in a moment.
wow.
Seeing we're talking about
Wow.
like spiritual warfare, there was like
Yeah.
a
There's a
very
theme going on here.
huge, there was a huge shift. And I feel like the demonic had such a hold on my family from my
Mm,
brother Michael, who I pray for all of the time, to my parents, to
mm,
just the whole thing. So,
yeah.
other than that, like
Okay.
there was another time I remember so vividly, besides being pushed down the stairs. And that was crazy in itself. I'll have to tell you that in a moment. But these
Yeah.
are the top three physical experiences that I had.
Mm,
The next one was I was laying in bed and I was sleeping. Okay, I'm going to share four actually, because that one,
yeah.
I don't know how that happened. That one was crazy too. And I feel like I feel like
I'm
there
here
was
for it.
something spiritual for it. So,
Yeah.
but this time I'm sleeping, and the way my sister and I's room was set up, it was a huge room, huge room.
Yeah.
So the room, like imagine pretty large dimensions, right? Walk-in
Yeah.
closet is down here. The door that leads into our room is right here. So you have the walk-in
Okay.
closet, you have a little cutout right here where my sister's bed was. About
Mm-hmm.
10 to 15 feet away, my bed is in this corner against the wall.
Yeah.
Window here on these walls, right? Our beds are super far apart, mostly
Mm.
so we wouldn't mess with each other. They used to be right
Yeah.
next to each other. As we got a little older and like we're picking on each other more and like we're beating each other up. My mom
Yeah.
moved. Like I mean,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, we were just like the definition of sisters. Like that was, and we're Irish twins, they call it. We're only a year and a half
Mm.
apart. So we were like constantly just like fighting each other. So she was like, can't do this. Y'all gotta be at least, you need some kind of separation. So she gave us
Yeah.
one of the larger rooms in the house. There were quite a few bedrooms that were all relatively large. It was a beautiful historic home. It was such a blessing in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But so we're separated like that. I'm laying in bed and all of a sudden I feel something pinch the back of my arm, like
Mm.
hard. Like, I don't mean like a bug bit me. Okay, like what it feels like when someone grabs the fat
Inches.
on the back of your arm. Yes, and like pinches you. Like that is not
Yeah.
mistakable, right? And so I'm laying in bed and I felt that and I like opened my eyes a little bit and I was like, Stephanie, get off of me. Like, oh, it's
Mm.
late. Like, what are you doing? Go to your bed.
Yeah.
Like, I was
Yeah.
so tired I didn't care. I fell asleep again and I felt it again. And this time it was a little bit harder. And I was like, go, like, get off. Right. And it's the same
Mm.
kind of scenario. I just assume my sibling is messing with me. And
Yeah.
then the last time that it happened, it like hurt. It was like no
Mm.
longer annoying. It was like very, very painful.
Yeah.
So I sat up all the way because I hadn't sat up at that point. I sat up all the way. I pulled my blanket back and I was like, stop. And I sat up. She is all the way in her bed, right? But I mean, she is like laid out
Knocked out.
under the covers. Like
Mm.
there would have been no time for her to run back. If she was really fast, I might see her jump into bed and throw the covers over her. But like they were
Some
that,
last minute momentum, right?
yes, right. Like they were that far apart, but her slumped with the cover completely like halfway over, just laid out, like
Mm.
just completely passed out.
Girl's been knocked
There's
out for
no
hours.
way. Yes, and I'm like looking around. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid, so I just covered my head and I forced myself to go back to sleep at that point.
Mm.
Um, but that time was another very vivid time. The time I got pushed down the stairs, it was wild because I had these little boots on and had a tiny heel on it.
Mm.
And at first, I thought my foot was just stuck on the stair. But when I went to go, like I felt my heel had gotten stuck. I went to go lift my foot off the stair, and I kid you not, it was like something was holding my ankle to the ground.
Mm.
Like, I mean, I could not lift my foot off of the ground. Then, as I'm sitting there trying to pull my foot, right as I tried to pull it one more time. And right as I did that, it was as if nothing was stuck. It like I didn't feel the boot come off the stair, nothing, and I
Yeah.
just went toppling down the stairs.
Mm.
Um, yeah, it was absolutely wild. The only other thing I'll say about like experience wise, and then I want to tell you about the shift
Yeah.
is I
Yeah.
was laying on my bed and it did give me a fear of lightning for a while. Sometimes I still get a
Mm.
little anxious. So there
Yeah.
was a window here, a window on the other side of the wall. So there's like a corner, one window on this side, there's a big space of wall. There was like an outlet for the TV right there, and then there's another window on the other side of the TV. So the TV's in that corner. My bed was turned toward the TV. We often rearranged our room, and my mom, she just loved to change. It
Mhm.
was like her stress relief was to change everything in the house.
No, I relate. That is me.
Yes, she will like move everything around. I'd walk in, I'd be like, why is my room like this? Like it's like so I'm laying on the edge of my bed. My sister Melanie is behind me, and it was
Mm,
thundering. And this may have just been coincidence, but it was crazy. Um, so I'm laying there and I'm like head on the edge of the bed, laying on my stomach, watching the TV. And I kept scooting forward toward the window.
mhm,
And she said, you should scoot back. Like, it's thundering, it's lightning. You're right near the window.
mhm.
And I was like, okay, but a kid,
Yeah,
they're just going to
yeah.
keep doing it. So I kept scooting up. My sister's telling me, scoot back. I scoot up, I scoot back. We're doing this whole back and forth ordeal. And I scooted up and I'm sitting there. I was sitting there for like maybe 30 minutes. I'm not moving, nothing. And out of nowhere, I feel my sister pull me back. Like it felt like
Mm,
slow motion. She like grabs me and pulls me back. Right as she pulls me back, a lightning strike or something.
mm,
I see this giant flash of light. It came through the window. The window did not break.
mhm.
So I don't know how this happened. Maybe there's a scientific reason for this. I don't know.
Yeah.
Came through the window, hit the TV. The whole
Mm.
thing blew up in smoke. Fire alarms
Oh my
going off and
gosh.
everything. I do not know. I have no other explanation other than the grace of God. And He gave her supernatural speed to be able to pull me back and to know
Mm.
that that
Wow.
was about to happen. Like, I mean, her and I both watched it
Yeah.
get lit. Like, we watched this light come into the room. She knew it was coming. Like, she pulled me back.
Wow.
And
Mm.
that was that's the last experience I'll share. There were many, many more. I mean, our
Yeah.
basement even had the things that they would embalm they had like the
Oh
tray that they would like
gosh.
lay the body on and stuff
Yeah.
like that, like the little like chains and stuff. And
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
wild. So my mom reading the Bible, right? As she started to read the Bible, all of a sudden there was this shift in our house after my father left. And before I
Mm.
came to Christ fully, to my like full understanding now, I
Yeah.
thought that it was because my father exited and that's why the house shifted and lifted.
Mm.
Looking back on it now, I don't believe that that was the case at all.
Yeah.
So she starts reading the Bible, and all of a sudden, when I tell you the house even looked different,
Wow.
like through my eyes, there was a shift. There was a spiritual shift in the home. And I had a dream. At that point, I started having dreams. I had a dream and I told my mother about it. I don't know where she was in her faith. For me, this would be confirmation for me, so I'm sure it was for her.
Yeah.
I told her, and we hadn't even really been to church, but I remember seeing the old school picture of Jesus on the wall,
Mhm.
which technically, biblically, we shouldn't have, right? But God uses all
Yeah.
things for the good of those who love Him.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I saw this picture on the wall, and this is early 2000s. Everyone knows what picture I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
I can physically see it
yes,
sitting there.
yes. And it's like in a frame, and it's Jesus. And she's reading the Bible, and I knew this, and I all of a sudden had a dream.
Mm.
And I said, Mom, I said, I just ran downstairs and I said, Jesus is my best friend. I'm little at this point.
Mm.
We hadn't been to church yet.
Fresh.
Like, we hadn't done anything. And she's like, what are you talking about? You know what I mean? Because, like, she hadn't told me anything about scripture. She just started telling me that Jesus was God. And I was
Mhm.
like, you know, I don't even remember even asking her, well, what does that mean? What does God mean? Like, I didn't even
Mm-hmm.
ask her that. I was just like,
Mm-hmm.
okay. And like, I just went with it. And I had this dream about Jesus. And it's funny, he did not look like that picture, just so everybody knows, records out. But I also could not see his face. And now that I've read the
Mm.
Bible, it says, like the face of the Lord,
Mm.
nobody has seen. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because
Yeah.
his glory would probably kill us.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I didn't know that at the time,
Wow.
but I just remember this man of light. Like, I mean, he was made out of light. Like, not his skin was light. He had
Mm.
no skin color. He was made out of light. And his
Mm.
clothing was white like my shirt, but it was
Mm.
light white. Like, it was,
Mm.
well, it was white light. Like, his skin was like this golden light, and
Mm.
his shirt was white light, like his clothes, his
Yeah.
tunic, and he had on a tunic. And he had on like this long tunic. And I remember in the dream we were sitting there and we were playing with my toys. That was the only thing that happened in that dream.
Stop. It's gonna
And
make me cry.
he was sitting there with me and just at the bottom of the steps in the living room in that house, and
Mm.
he was playing with me with my toys. And I remember I kept like trying to look up, and I was like looking up so high and I couldn't see his face, no matter how hard
Aw.
I tried. I could only see him from here down,
Mm.
but I knew it was Jesus. I couldn't even see his
Mm.
hair, so I don't know what color his hair is. I don't know any of that.
Yeah.
I only saw him from here down. And
Mm.
he was just with me, and he was so present. And I just, when I lost my way, the Lord reminded me back to that dream, and we'll talk about that later. But I told my mom about it, and that was right before everything happened. And
Mm.
um, I said, Jesus is my best friend. I didn't even know anything about him. And it makes me think of that Bible verse, out of the mouth of babes, they will
Mm.
proclaim the name of the Lord. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's so true because I knew him more then than I did in
Mm.
certain adult areas of my
Yeah.
life.
Wow. Wow.
And that's when that shift happened. And then we
I
became
just gotta
homeless
say,
and everything else. And it
so
was, but yeah,
you
go ahead.
reminded me. No, I was just gonna say I love when you said more present than, when you're an adult. And it just reminds me of scripture when, the everyone's arguing and it's like, which one is the best? And Jesus is like, truly, truly, I tell you that
Be
children
like
are the
these
greatest.
little
Yes.
children.
And
Yes.
that's so beautiful because to describe how present he was with you and how just that shift. I really do believe because the word of God, I think taking that moment to just acknowledge that your mom by opening the Bible and reading the word of the Lord is just so profound and strong that nearly just taking that time to spend in the word of God
Ooh,
is powerful and we
it is.
don't acknowledge it. And his love is so strong. And I want to
It
piggyback
is.
off of you real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Because I grew up I want to say in a questionable home. It definitely was not a mortuary. Um, but I grew up a little bit in the country and, well, country in the sense of like all the houses. Like if you needed to go to someone, you're gonna walk for a
Right.
little bit. Um,
Right.
so, but I remember we did experience, and so I can only talk about one experience my mom had and one experience that I had. Well, among many, but reason I want to say this because I do before we leave this topic because how you ended it was so
Yes.
beautiful that I do want to just help anyone who's listening who has previous, just let them, know that one God is the light in all darkness, but that
Yes.
also the Bible does recognize evil spirits.
Yes.
Mary Magdalene was possessed by 7 demons. She was going through it. We have another guy who was also being possessed, and Jesus rebuked them and put them into pigs. So this is a real thing, and it's acknowledged by the Bible. Um, And these are things that can, harm us, and that just the word of God is so strong. But I'll start off with a little bit of background. The house belonged to someone who I if I'm remembering correctly, he was deceased in the house, like in the sense of like I think he was gunned down in the house because he was doing like drug activity and all this
Oh,
stuff. And so it
wow.
ended up in the house. And so the one experience, everyone who came over, or at least who had stayed there a promptly amount of time, had similar experiences, but not. But I'm going to focus on two prominently ones. Um, my mom one day, me and my stepsister were at school. My brother wasn't home. He was at school. My stepdad wasn't home. He was working. So it was only my mom, and she was in the bedroom. She was laying down, and she hears. So kind of, I'm going to try to do it how you did it. Her room was here, right? Let's say, I don't know if you can say, but here. And
Yes,
so the dining room was like right adjacent behind it. So
right.
her wall was
You had
right
to
next
go
to the dining
through
room.
the dining room to get to her room.
No, well, yes and no. So they were actually right behind each other, kind of. Like here's the room and
Oh,
here's the
okay.
room, and then the hallway was right here. Yeah. And
Oh,
so
okay, okay.
um all of this is important because she's laying in bed, and I remember she told me this when I got a little bit older, like two years after it happened, or maybe a year, but that's neither here
Mhm.
nor there. She's laying down and she hears talking in the dining room. Like she hears like a group of men talking, and she's like, "Oh, did he come home early and bring coworkers?" Because he would come, and like people would come and people would sit at the dining table and talk. And my mom's the type of person where if she's not expecting guests, she's not going to make an appearance. She's like, "Nope, that's beyond me. I'm going to sit in my comfort." Um, and so she was in the room, and she hears them talking and talking and talking and talking and talking and like clatter and all this stuff. But she's like, my mom, like me, is very nosy. So she was like, I can't hear what they're saying. She's like, it was just a
Yeah,
lot of mumble. And again, country. So no TV was on. It's not like we were neighbors and we could, or apartment where you can confuse
right,
it.
right,
And
right.
so she's like, there is noise. Where is that noise coming from? There's no radio on. So she's just like, I can't make out. So she gets up and she leaves her room. And again, she goes in the hallway towards the kitchen so she can peer. And she says that her heart drops because there's no one there. There's not a soul. And she swears that she heard like talking and meeting and all this stuff. And she left. She's like, I had to get out of the house for the day. Again, like a lot of occurrences. But the reason I say this is because during that time in my life, just there was a lot of arguing in the household. There was a lot of just conflict, a lot of brokenness.
Yes,
We were not we were not a house where like we were praying all the time and stuff like that. Like that just was not like we grew up Catholic and we would go to church like every other Sunday, but it wasn't like we were practicing in the house. Um, and I'm saying like there were really intense experiences in the sense of just the conflict argument. And I remember very vividly. I was in the 6th grade and I had a dream. I was sleeping in my room and I had a dream. And in my dream, my room is covered in blood. Like I was just murdered. I don't remember being murdered in my dream, but
wow.
I remember waking up from a murder. I don't, just blood everywhere. And in my dream, I get up and I'm walking and I see my mom, but I run up to her. I'm like, mom, my room's covered in blood. And she walks right through me. And I run in front of her again, trying to hug her, and I'm like dead. Like I can't get anyone's attention. There's blood everywhere. I'm just panicking in my dream. And then I think this was the Lord, but then that morning, my mom never woke me up in middle school. I was responsible for waking myself up. But for whatever reason, my mom woke me up that morning. I don't know if she heard me stirring, but I woke up and I saw her, and the whole realization that it's a nightmare and all this stuff. And I just hug her and I just start crying. And I'm like, Mom, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Like I tell her I was dead. Like I just kept saying, I was dead. I was dead. I was dead. I was dead. I didn't go to school that day. I couldn't do it. Um, but learning what I did about that house and what took place, like it just created a lot of conflict. I mean, like
Right.
people were saying, like even my brother's girlfriend at the time, she had stayed, and then when she had stayed, we had left to go do something. No one was out there. She was napping, so we're like, we're not gonna wake her up. We're just gonna go grab what we're gonna grab.
Yeah,
We're gonna come back. When we got back, she was livid, furious, because she thought my
freaking out.
brother was pranking her, similar to what you described. She was like, that's not funny. And he's like, I was not here. We just got back. And she got even angry, like, why would you leave me here alone? Da, 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 da. And so I'm not going to get into her experiences. I don't remember all of it, but I just know that she was napping
Right.
and then she was not napping. And so why I say like, it's spiritual warfare is real. And like the enemy will do whatever he can to separate families, to break families, and again,
Oh,
like plant
yes.
seeds of hatred and anger and bitterness and argument and all of these things. And just the healing that has taken place even in my own family, like my mom took a toll, like living in that on that property, because my mom lived on that property up to 2018, and it took a toll on her. And when she lost the property, because she lost the property, I think personally I was like, that's God. Because things started to take weird turns. They were just My stepfather started to worship things. Even at a young age, I was like, that doesn't seem right. Like, I'm saying, like, just kind of like doing things that were idolatry, like, like this is going to bring us money if we all like
Like
if have this.
manifestation and stuff
Yeah,
like
like
that.
altars. Yeah, like altars to these random little gods. And I just remember being like, that doesn't seem right. And so when my mom
Yeah.
lost the property, I was like, that, like, because it was hard on her, but I can see a shift in her heart. Like,
Yeah.
that was the most difficult thing my mom probably has ever experienced among many. But I look at it and I'm like, I think that was God, because that place just had a lot of, like, experiences. Like, we had two house fires on that property, like two. Like, one of our homes caught on fire. We replaced it with a new one, but then the motorhome that we were living in at the time, while we waited for the other one, that one caught on fire, and my mom almost perished in that one. So, like, don't dismiss things that happen, whether it's just like, arguments, or just uncomfortableness, or again, multiple fires. It's possible that there is
Yes.
spiritual warfare going on. There's
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and that is definitely the time to pray and pray for a hedge of protection. Now, that doesn't mean we should obviously, get hyper focused on every bad thing
Mm-hmm.
that happens within our home, because the Lord says that we have authority over our homes. And if He allows something to
Yes.
happen, prime example, the other night, this is something that the Lord allowed to happen. My neighbors, I doubt they'll ever see this, but they, I've never seen them park both of their cars like back to back. We have a lot of street parking,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a driveway though. And I've never seen them have like two cars back to back, like right in front of their front door on the street side parking. I'd never seen that. My husband and I are sitting here eating dinner. All of a sudden, we hear someone slam on their brakes, and then we hear a crash. And it sounded
Mm.
so close that we thought it was my vehicle, because our driveway isn't paved, and I have a little, my husband calls it a go-kart. And we had to replace my splash guard because I hit a stone that was in our driveway. He said, so
Yeah.
just, he was like, babe, just park on the side for now till we get it paved. And I was
Yeah.
like, all right. So we were like, oh no, because I'm one of the only cars out there. But we
Yeah.
looked, someone had ran the stop sign in front of our house, not where I park on the other side. Someone had ran a
Mm.
stop sign in front of our house. And I don't know if they were intoxicated or if their brakes went out. There's a left and a right, there's no straight.
Mm.
Okay. Straight
Yeah.
is my
Yeah.
neighbor's house.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh my
and
gosh.
they rammed into their car. And
Mm.
the minute I saw what had happened, I said that was the Lord's protection over their home.
Mm.
Because as
Yeah.
upset that they probably are, that their cars are
Yeah.
damaged, like it moved
Yeah.
their car onto part of their lawn.
Mm.
But if they would not have had their cars there,
Mm.
that car would have went through their front door.
Oh
Like
yeah.
it
And who
it would have
knows? Mm.
literally, and they just moved in, and I was just thinking like they have their dog outside on the front porch a lot. They let their dog hang out there, and I was
Mm.
just thinking like, oh my, like thank you, Lord. And I didn't say that to them because it didn't feel like an appropriate appropriate
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And also I
Yeah.
haven't met them yet. They just bought the house, so imagine I go, hey, by the way, that was
Thank goodness,
God
right?
that your car got hit. Like, thank goodness your car got hit. Like, that would just not,
Yeah.
it wouldn't make sense
Yeah.
most likely. But so, just for anyone
Yeah.
that does listen to this or watch this, it's not to get hyper focused on bad things that happen, but don't ignore them
See how
either. Like, pray,
Mm.
pray that, that protection over your home.
Yeah, the armor of God is real. I mean,
Mm,
we live in a fallen world, in a broken world, and the Bible
yes,
says, there are principalities and things that are against us. So it's,
yes,
I absolutely agree. Like, keep an eye out for it, but don't hyper focus on it. Like, it's not like
yes,
no weapon formed against me will prosper. And that is the word of the Lord. And so knowing that and wearing that on your heart, that's saying, like, you know what? Because one of the things I tell myself is like, if this has happened, it is because the Lord wanted it to happen. If He did not want it to happen, it would not have happened. So I'm going to ride
yes.
with it. I'm going to see where it takes me. Because it really does, it will grow and develop you. And it sucks. Spiritual growth sucks.
Mhm.
It can be uncomfortable. It hurts. You're like, I don't want to be here. But then you look back and you're like, okay, I mean, talk to Joseph, talk to David, talk to Job, talk to all of these biblical characters who are like, no, we know. We went through this type of pain. And again, why the podcast is so important. What God can do with your pain. So spiritual warfare can and will come, but it's also knowing, like, no, I have the armor of God. No weapon formed against me will prosper. And also, if God is allowing this to happen, it is going to be a part of a bigger picture that I can't yet see. So love that we
Yes.
went on that whole sidetrack thing, because I mean, I just also, it was just so rich though from you. Like, it was so very rich, how you delivered it. And again, like, I think I talked about this in Megan's episode, but there is a guy in deliverance ministry, and he talked about growing up his experiences in his bedroom, and but his gift was deliverance, so he was more sensitive to it, but the enemy was attacking him to weaken him against it as a child. And so he turned that memory of those, horrible nights in his room of, being scared and having all these images and things pop up in his room, to later fuel his ministry and say, like, I have experienced this.
Once you've
um
experienced the
so good.
demonic, once you've experienced the demonic, there is nothing scarier.
Mm,
Um, there, like the amount of authority, once you take those feelings of fear and everything to the Lord, once you've
mm,
experienced those things, you can feel the authority of the Lord on your life. Like
mm. Amen.
before my husband came to Christ, I told him all the time, like, I would leave you before I left Jesus. Like,
Mm,
or, you can go, not that saying I would leave, but like, you
yeah,
can leave, but,
yeah,
and if you
yeah.
leave me because of my faith or you do whatever, that is
Mm,
your decision.
yeah,
Like, but
yeah,
I'm gonna tell you what, I will be
yeah.
serving the Lord. And I've already have the victory because Christ has the victory.
So beautiful. And that's that transparency and openness of saying, like, my heart belongs to the Lord. And it takes,
Yes.
I mean, let's also acknowledge that it takes a while. I mean, it depends on the person, but for certain people, it can take a long time to give your heart to the Lord, to even, because I used to think that I knew God and I used to think that I believed in Jesus. It wasn't until I fully submitted myself and gave my heart to
Hmm.
God, and then got to such a place where I was like, you can take everything from me, Job it out,
Yes.
but I cannot let go of God. Like, I might, there have been days where you can be tempted to be like, this is exhausting. I don't know if I can do this. I've had people say, like, I came so close, but then it's like God won't let you go. And
He
you
won't.
realize that He won't leave. You can even think about leaving, but God will say, I'm not leaving. I am with you for everything and every, aspect and corner of your life. And so, very beautifully said. Like, I agree, people can come and go, but like you, it's not as easy to just get up and saying, I'm gonna go with so and so now. Like, it's once you've discovered that love, it's so beautiful. And sometimes it takes a while to get there, and that's because God is such a beautiful God of consent. And oh my gosh, we're like, what, 58 minutes in, and this is already
Yeah.
so packed with goodness. um I'm gonna say this is. I think this is the first one I've done this, but I'm gonna say let's take a quick break before.
There is no greater love, no greater love than this.
Right, we are back. Our coffees were warm, and now they're lukewarm. Because we took some sidetrack talking before we jump back in. But yeah, I mean, that first half, absolutely incredible. That was so good. Um, So let's jump in and keep going. So you talked about the shift, and then you started to talk about, like, that when you got older, you got a house, and then there was like this peace. That during that time there
Yes,
was peace
there
there.
was a few years of peace. So we got a very small home. compared to what we had came from. It's actually it had one more bedroom than what I have in the house we live in now, which is funny. But for me at
Mm,
the time, going from that big historic house um, to the camper to this house, the house was smaller, but it was not as small as that pop-up camper. So the minute we got in the house, my mom, we have this big storage unit. So we went and we picked up like just one box of toys just for that moment. And we didn't have beds or
mm,
anything yet. Um, like all of that was still in the works. I think we had some in storage, but like we were missing a lot of things. We didn't have
yeah.
very much. But so I just remember when I first walked into that house, like it was going to be our first night there. We, I had like my little box of toys. I just started throwing them, like throwing them
Mm,
out, throwing them everywhere, and I was so excited. Um, and one came down and hit me in the face, and I was crying because like it wasn't the best idea to throw them.
short-lived.
Right. But like I was just so excited to have space. So I mean, I was like throwing them. Like I was like, I want to move.
Mm.
Like I can move. I can run. I was like running around in all the rooms because like we didn't
Oh,
have that, like we didn't have space like that. And
yeah.
I can't remember if we had two cots or just one cot at the time, but we all kind of slept in the living room. Like we had an air mattress, we had a cot, and then we had sleeping bags, but we had a house. And we were so used
Yeah.
to like, when we were in the pop-up camper, we would take turns sleeping in the bed. And then we had like this little um where you ate lunch, like the booth.
Mm,
So we would like
yeah.
sleep. So one of us would like sleep in the booth. And
Mm,
so there was that. And then we had the bed. We would share the bed and stuff like that. The
yeah.
backyard was awesome, and we were in upstate New York our first winter there. There was this giant hill in our backyard. Then there was a drop off, and there was the
Mm,
patio. And then on the side was this big plain of grass that also was slightly downhill. It's very hilly. Albany area is very hilly. There's a lot of hills and stuff like that.
yeah.
And so there was like this slightly downhill grassy area. So big hill, right? And we would go, the patio was like maybe 4 feet. So we would go off the side into the side yard.
Oh
And it
my
was like,
goodness.
it was
The
awesome.
best
Like,
thing.
yeah, it was the best thing ever. And in the summer, we kept our sleds out because we didn't go into the side yard. We couldn't get that much speed without the
Mm,
snow, but we would still go down the hill. That's how steep it was.
oh
And
my gosh.
it was just, we just had the best time. We were going to church and we were going to this, I don't know if it was, I think it was non-denominational, the church we were going to at
Mm,
the time. So like my mom was in faith and we were doing that. And for 2 years, I mean, we had stuff, going on from here to there. But I'd say about 2 years, it was just straight peace.
mm,
So like ages, I think we got into that house when we were only in that house for maybe at the most 2 years is how long
mm,
we were in that house before things started to they took another shift. And this is where I would say as much as um, the first part of my life when I was a young girl, that was my testimony, was the first part of my
mm,
life. But I would say from here, oh my gosh, I mean, I guess you could say I have like five testimonies. Like
wow.
as crazy
I'm
as it
here for
is,
all of them.
I mean, but so from this point all the way until this will take us from here until adulthood, I'd say. So about 2 years of peace, and I remember right after how old was I? I just turned 10. Right
Mm,
after my 10th birthday, or it may have even been like that same week, or maybe it was a month later. All of this is genuinely a blur, this time period in my life. My mom got diagnosed with brain cancer. And leading up to that, she was super sick. That whole past year before my grandmother came down, and my sister Melanie was such a big help. And of course, my brother Stephen was too, but he was still finishing high school. So, I mean, he would go to work and stuff like that, and he would cook for us. But like, there was about maybe 6 months, like leading up to my birthday, everything. Once my birthday came, I remember that being a really fun time. Like, my grandma was there, like, there was a little bit more family there. I didn't realize why they were there.
Mm,
They weren't there for my well, I mean, my birthday happened, so they were there for my birthday, but that's not why everyone was there. Like,
mm,
and
yeah.
I didn't know she was, getting the testing and stuff like that. My sister Melanie, I'm 90% sure was the one that said, "I'm taking you to the hospital. Enough is enough." My mom was throwing
Mm,
up and like she couldn't even get out of bed. I remember I would like boil noodles, and my little brother, Matthew, who's now 22, at the time, we didn't know he had autism yet. And you wouldn't tell now, like you wouldn't be able to tell. But when you're younger, it affects a lot, like of
yeah.
just like your life and learning and moving around and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
but Matt liked to help with the dishes, so we let him. I mean, he
Mm,
made a mess all the time with it, but we were all kids. We didn't care. My mom was just happy that they were halfway clean. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So he liked doing that, and so we would let him do that. And I remember I was boiling noodles one day. She was so god awfully ill, and um, she was in bed. She was throwing up, and I slipped because he had water all over the floor, and I dumped boiling hot water just like
Mm,
all over my body. So I've never, I mean, I
mm,
that was the last time I saw my mom get up that fast. She like could barely get up and like do the day. That's how bad it was. And so my brother would cook a lot and things like that leading up to her finally going and like going to the hospital because she was like,
mm,
no, I must have like the flu or something. And we didn't have we had like no
mm,
money. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
like going to the doctor
Yeah.
was not on her list
Mm-mm.
of things to do.
Yeah.
Um, Getting us to the doctor was a lot as it was. And
Yeah.
so she got up so fast, threw me in an ice bath, and thankfully she did it fast enough to where I remember my thumb, like, I think it was this side, it doesn't really matter, but my thumb was pretty badly burned.
Mm,
Like from here down, I'd say. Other than that, I mean, it spilled all over my body, but thankfully, I
mm,
I blame the ice bath. I mean, I thank the ice bath, really. I'm pretty sure that's what kind of
yeah.
saved me in that moment. Um, but after that, she got scanned, and right after my birthday, we found out she had brain cancer. So my grandmother was
Mm,
down, and that was interesting. Her and my sister, woo, they were butt in heads.
mm,
My grandmother was traditional Catholic, and
mm,
my mom grew up with that. But we didn't do Catholicism. It wasn't till later in life where she really started getting into the Bible. And then, like, we were, she was like just a Jesus lover, like, you know what I mean?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
Catholicism is a very interesting walk. Um,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of things that, can definitely steer you from the love of Jesus. I'm not saying all Catholics are bad by any shape or form. I believe we have
Hmm.
brothers and sisters everywhere, but I went to Catholic school and stuff like that as well. And there's just a lot of things that they do that go against scripture.
Yeah.
Which that's just the human experience, like
Yeah.
we all do it to a certain extent. Just it being organized
Mm,
religion like that definitely affects a lot of people. But I digress. So my grandmother came, her and my sister, like button heads, right? And not for wrong reasons. I mean, Stephanie had some good points. I mean, my grandmother, she was older, and she did what she could do, and my sister
Mm.
Melanie was very in there. She knew how my grandmother was, and like she was like on it, you know what I mean? Like she was like
Yeah.
trying to make sure we
Yeah.
were good in her own
Yeah.
way. And eventually my mom got so sick that
Mm.
my grandmother decided to, well, my grandmother really convinced her to move us to Rhode Island so that she could go to the doctors in Boston. She had stage 4
Mm.
brain cancer. Her brain was just infested with tumors. She had to get brain surgery. She had one cut out, or maybe a few cut out. I'm
Mm.
not sure. She had this big scar from here to here
Mm.
on the side of her head. And I look back and I remember she'd be trying to put her hairpiece on. That my auntie
Mm.
Luann was a hairdresser actually. And
Mm.
she came and stayed with us. I loved my Auntie Luann. Like, oh my gosh, I just like she was my favorite person. I wish I was still in contact with her. She was a Rhode
Mm.
Island hairdresser, and she was just like, the funniest, the red nails, the
There.
big poof. She was like, "Oh my God, how are you?" Like that's just like how she
Yes. Oh
was.
my gosh.
She was great, and she was just so fun. She made everything so fun. So she got my mom this hairpiece, and I'm pretty sure she like colored it herself and like, made
Mm.
it really pretty. And my mom, sometimes she wanted I am assuming she wanted it to breathe. And I just remember, I can only imagine how much this affected like her self-image, like looking back as an adult woman now. I would look at my
Mm.
mom and
Yeah.
say, Mom, like you need to put something over that. Like it's scaring me. Like it's scaring me. Like I don't
Mm.
want to see it. And there was a few times she got upset with me. And I mean, understandably so, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I didn't know I was a young girl, but she's like trying to do this, she's trying to take care of her kids, and she's a single
Yeah.
mom as it is, and now she has this super gnarly scar, like black stitching, like this
Mm.
thick, just down the side.
Yeah.
And I always feel bad. Like I think back to that and I'm like, I wish I would have never said that to her. You know what I mean? Like just
Yeah.
the effect it probably had on her mental state at the time. But she never blamed me for it. I was a child.
Yeah.
So fast forward, we moved to Rhode Island and I have this paper for my new school and I've got a uniform that I have to wear to school and I'm talking to my dad and I'm asking him like, "Hey dad, what do you do for a living?" And I'm like asking him all these questions, right? And he's like, "What is this for?" And he said, "Oh, for my new school." Well, I didn't know
Mm.
that my mom's side of the family technically moved us out of the state illegally because,
Oh.
like,
Yeah.
custody. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I
Oh
didn't
gosh.
know that my dad didn't know I was going to a new
Yeah.
school.
Like, oh my
So then he's
goodness.
talking to me and he's like, "Oh, what do you mean new school?" And like, I just remember it being this super calm conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, my new school, I have a uniform. Like, we're at grandma's." And he's like, "You're at grandma's?"
Yeah.
He's like, "What do you mean?" Like, and really we were living at
Yeah.
my brother Michael's, but when I said we're at grandma's, I meant we were in Rhode Island, and he knew what that meant. Like, we
Yeah.
were no longer in the state of New York. And
Yeah.
so family court is now open. My father
Mm.
decided, and I do believe that this was his decision. My father decided to not press charges because he knew how sick my mom was. And we stayed in Rhode Island because it was terminal. Um,
Yeah.
and we stayed there. We stayed with the family, and he was all right with it. He wasn't happy the way it happened. I can only assume they probably thought he would fight her leaving, but um, all said and done, like the way it happened really worked out as far as like God's eyes go because God could see everything and we had so much family support during that time. We
Mm.
were around my cousins. My brother Michael, living with him, he did the best that he could. It was definitely an interesting experience. He was an ex-Marine. He had a lot of things that he definitely needed to work on himself,
Yeah.
and he still does. But I genuinely think that everybody tried the best that they could with the cards that they had been dealt. Um, there are definitely a lot of things that my siblings and I went through. I think Rhode Island, I think I went through the least in Rhode Island compared to my siblings. Um,
Mm.
my sister had a very hard time, and my brother Michael definitely had a hard time together. And so that was kind of a blessing for me because my mom was my everything. Like,
Mm.
I was a mama's girl. You can even ask, I mentioned my Barbara earlier in the podcast, and
Yeah.
my mother would go do things that she needed to do, right? She never dated, she
Mm.
never did any of that, but she would need to go shopping for something or
Mm.
go, sometimes we'd stay at Barbara's while she worked or something like that. And
Yeah.
you can ask my barber, I would be at the door as a young girl, sobbing for hours because I just wanted my
Mm.
mother to come back. And I was like, she
Yeah.
left me here. Like, you know what I mean?
No.
I was
Yeah.
so attached to my mother. And so I think that her going through that and
Mm.
me not experiencing as much as some of my other siblings did was kind of a
Yeah.
gift from God for me. Um, because he also knew what I was about to go through after she passed. And once we get into that, that'll be that's going to be a pretty interesting topic
Yeah.
once we get there. But she's sick, and I came to find out later that she actually only had a few months to live. And
Mm.
I didn't find this out when she was alive. We were just praying, and then my brother got us into the secret. So manifesting.
Mm.
And that's when things I
Yeah.
really started to feel like more of a negative shift because like we were praying
Mm.
first and then like we got into the secret and like manifesting and like and
Yeah.
I'm listening to this as a 10-year-old girl. So I don't know any
Yeah.
better. Like, and I still
Super
believed in,
impressionable.
yeah, and like I still believed in Jesus, but I'm like, oh, I mean, my family is saying this is fine. My brother is having me listening to this. I didn't know it was
Yeah.
witchcraft because that's what manifestation
Yeah.
is. And the only reason it
Yeah.
works is the Lord says power and death live in the tongue. He's not going to change a heavenly principle just because someone's using it incorrectly. He's not
Yeah.
going to change and say, no, it's not going to work because he's not a liar. You know what I mean?
No,
And he
yeah,
gave us free
absolutely.
will. So when he, when we use it incorrectly, that's
Mm.
why it still works because he is so good that he's not just
Yeah.
gonna, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I
Like,
mean, and people in the Bible would cause curses. They would say like,
yeah,
you could either bless or you could curse, and so that's
yeah,
why you're very right. Like it's like out like the Lord breathed onto us, and so every time we speak, we're breathing, and so it is the Spirit, it's the Lord, and so I absolutely agree that
yes.
you can either
Even
bless or
people
you can
that are
curse.
like, they think they're using like darker powers and stuff like that, or they're practicing witchcraft and they're like, no, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And
Mm.
you're going to these spirits and like to these idols, and they're giving you this power, all that stuff. Guess what? All those spirits you're worshiping, everything that you are manifesting, everything that's
Hmm.
bringing it to you has to bring it through the Lord first.
Yeah,
He still has to okay it. Even though you're doing
yeah,
it incorrectly, it's like when the devil went up to heaven and he was like, I bet I can get Job to turn against you. He had to go and ask
mm,
God for permission. They don't have
mm,
authority. They
yeah,
are still, whether you believe it or not, or you worship Satan, or you worship, all these other idols and these false gods and these spirits, and like you're having all these spirits come to you and everything else. They still have to go through the creator of the universe.
mm,
to
Yeah.
do anything in your life. Like you're not cheating the system. Like you're not. So anyway, to bring it back to the home point, we're manifesting, like we're doing all this stuff I didn't know. And we had a great year with her. We went to Disney World. We did so many things. The only bad thing that happened during that year is I went to Catholic school. A lot of things happened. I was a very lovey-dovey child. I wanted to
Mm,
be friends with everybody. I wasn't a mean kid. I mean, I always had a temper, I'd have to say. Like, it's something I still deal with now. I'm working through. I've always been very high in my emotions and just like very emotional and sensitive
mm,
and things of that nature. The only thing that happened during that year is I had a fit out with my Catholic school, and it all started, at least this is when I remember it started. It may have started before this, and maybe I just don't remember because, like I said, this whole time in my life is like kind of blurry. But I remember this very specifically. I had this friend named Catherine, and I told her that I loved her. And I just meant,
mm,
like, as my friend, like, I love you. Like, I really
yeah.
genuinely love you.
Yeah.
And so all the other kids started questioning me. They were like, did you say you love Catherine? I was like, yes, I love Catherine.
And
And
she's an incredible person.
yeah, yeah. And so then it turned into I'm in love with Catherine, is how they spun it.
Mm,
And I was like,
yeah.
no. I was like, I love Catherine. So then
Yeah.
everybody in that classroom isolated me, and I was
Mm,
no longer spoken to because they thought I was gay. And that's awful
mm.
to do anyway. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I was gonna say that doesn't
Yeah, that's
represent the
like,
grace of God
no, it did
anyway.
not. And then I get pulled into the principal's
Yeah.
office. And I'm being
Yeah.
told at 10 years old, maybe, no, I wasn't 11 yet because this is leading up to my birthday. I'm being told that homosexuality is bad and all this stuff. And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Oh
You know
my.
what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. You're like, I'm
Like
not even educated.
I'm 10 years old. Like, oh, I don't really.
Yeah.
I was like, no,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't love her like that. Like, I just love her, and so I'm getting
Yeah.
like berated at 10, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, you know, and so then my birthday party, I was so excited, and I felt like the kids were kind of starting to talk to me again, and I was a kid that
Mm,
like I tried to just brush it off, and I was like, it's okay, like I forgive you, and I just like kept going and tried to make
yeah.
connections again. And I was always like that
Yeah.
when I was younger. And my mother really made me a very, as sensitive as I was, and I cried a lot and stuff like that, I was a very confident young girl. Like I had sass and pizzazz, and
Aw.
like I just was like, it's
Yeah.
good. Like I'm great. Like the way I've been made is great. And like this is my
Yeah.
first experience to where like even when we lived in upstate New York, I wasn't the most popular, but at some point, just because of my spunk, I guess, the most popular girl in school, Delana Fisher, I'll never forget, she took to me. And she was like, "Oh, we're gonna
Mm,
give you a makeover and all this stuff." And I was like, "Okay," like, you know what I mean? Like even
yeah.
she took to me, you know, and she didn't before. And so I was just this really spunky girl, and so I was like, I'm
Mm,
just gonna brush it off, and I just kept trying. I didn't hold a grudge as much as a kid can't hold a grudge. I mean, I'm sure I was a little petty and
yeah.
stuff like that. That just happens. But
Yeah.
so I invited every single person, everybody to my birthday party, and every single kid, right? 23 kids in this class. So the day of my birthday party, I had a Hannah Montana birthday party. I was so
Oh,
excited. Yes, like
stop.
yes, I had the decorations. I had a Hannah Montana cake. I was like, everyone's
Uh,
gonna think I'm so cool. Like I got to have, because that was the
a Hannah
thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was the
Did
thing.
you do anything to your hair? Did you have like a Hannah Montana wig or did you get
No,
highlights? Did you Okay.
I had like some of her like accessories and stuff like that.
Yeah.
that my brother had gotten. Like, we went all out. We had like pictures of Hannah Montana on the wall, and like we had all these pretty
Oh my
decorations.
gosh. I'd
And
have
so,
given anything to just see this right now.
yes, and like it was awesome. And so my family is starting to show up, and everyone's so excited. I'm starting to see my presents. I'm like waiting. I'm like, okay, when is everyone gonna be here? Like, my party starts at this time, and no one showed up. And I was like, it's okay, maybe they're late. So like my brothers distracted me. I'm playing with like my siblings just to try and have a good time.
Hmm.
Another hour goes by and no one's here. And then
Yeah.
and then another hour goes by and no one's here. So now
Mm.
2 hours have gone by and no one shows up. All of a sudden there's a knock at the door and I'm like somebody's here, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And so
Yeah.
I'm like waiting for them to come in. My brother goes because it was his house, and he answers the door because we were living there. Um, and it was Emily's mom, and she dropped off a present for me, and they had another party to go to, so they didn't
Mm.
stay, and not a single person showed up to my birthday party.
Mm.
So that was the first time I felt rejection in
Yeah.
like that strong of a sense. Like
Yeah.
I was just, and my mom was there. And I ran downstairs because, like, we had 3 levels to that house. The basement had been finished. There was like a bedroom and stuff. So my sister were down there and I were down there.
Yeah.
Um, and then my little brother was all the way upstairs. And then when my older brother came and stayed, he kind of stayed in upstairs. So the girls had their own space, the boys had their own space. And
Yeah.
I ran to my room. I am just devastated because, like, I was like, this is it. Like, this is, we're all going to be friends again. Like, this is going to do it. And I am just like crushed. No one, nobody showed up. And I go downstairs and I'm crying. I'm crying. Eventually, my mom slowly makes her way downstairs. She's like, she's super sick at this time. This was a few months before she passed away. So she made her way down the stairs, and she's sitting there with me and just letting me cry. Like, she's not saying anything. She's just letting me cry and like rubbing my back. And my brother comes downstairs and he's like, all these people are here. Like, don't be like that. Like, all of our family's here. Like, don't be like that. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And she looked at him and she said, Michael, this is her birthday. If she wants to cry, you need to let her cry. So she let me
Mm.
finish, and eventually I went upstairs. And it's still like, you can,
Yeah.
my best friend, I just shared this with her. I don't plan big things for my birthday.
Mm.
I haven't since that day. The only time I did was during COVID. It was my golden year, and we had such a great group of friends. But still, I didn't
Yeah.
invite like everybody. I said anyone who wants to come can come, and I invited our closest friends, and then they brought, some of their
Yeah.
friends. But it was
Yeah.
still just at the house, and
Mm.
but I have not ever planned like anything to do anything special, like,
Mm.
more than just a few people at the house, like, since that
Yeah.
point. And so my mom's there, and eventually we had a great time. Like, everything finished out and it was great. But that was the first time I ever felt the spirit of rejection on my back.
I agree on the spirit of rejection. That, and also that's such like, you see that stuff in movies, like,
Yeah.
oh, like, and you feel for that person. You're like, man, that really sucks that no one showed up. But like, to live it is a whole different thing, to actually fully experience that. So yeah, like, continue.
Oh my gosh. I mean, looking back on it, it felt like a Disney Channel movie. You know what I
Yeah, I was
mean?
gonna say
Like,
that's what it reminded me of.
yeah, like no one shows up for your birthday. It was no, not even 23 people, not even one person.
Yeah.
Um and I obviously don't hold anything
Yeah.
against any of them. We were all
Yeah.
kids, and I'm sure they were thinking, well, someone else will probably show up, so I just won't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah. And
um,
they are.
and it just happened that nobody came,
Yeah.
and
And so moving from that,
yeah,
this is such a time. You're going from that, and I can only imagine that you experienced that first, and that kind of I want to say that it kind of highlighted it for you, like
yeah.
rejection, because you talked about like this happened to me. I kept on trucking. I was doing fine.
Mm.
But this really hit you. So yeah, fill me in on
This, this
we
was
continue the
this,
domino effect and all that.
yeah, this was the start of a lot of rejection in my life. Um, of a lot of like that spirit of rejection stayed on me for the longest time. And now, actually, reflecting, your question was really great. I think that's going to help me now in my walk. Is I tend to get very defensive when I don't feel understood or when I feel rejected. And I,
Yeah.
even with my poor husband, I will press the issue, and I did it last night. I will press an
Mm,
issue just so hard because I want to be understood because I can't handle feeling rejected. Like it's something I struggle
mm,
with when and it's like I will press and press and press because I don't want them to reject me or think I'm
yeah.
coming off a certain way. And um, it definitely affects me. So moving from here, that was the first instant, and I didn't feel it again until after this happened. So the month of July, we had my brother's birthday. Everything was like pretty okay. My mom, I couldn't see that she was getting worse. I still had full hope of full recovery. And God did
Mm,
some amazing things during this time. Um, like I remember at one point we prayed, and we did pray to Saint Jude, which is that's idolatry. Um,
mm,
praying to the saints is
yeah.
like we're not supposed to pray to anyone but the Father. You know what
Mm,
I mean?
yeah.
But God uses all things for the good, of those whom He
Yeah.
loves. And
He
so
does.
we were praying, and Saint Jude is supposed to be like the saint that like helps with healing and just like sickness and stuff like that. That's what I was told at least. So we were praying.
Yeah.
Um, and all of a sudden, one of my mom's tumors just disappeared. Like it was gone.
Wow.
And so we did get to see, I've seen cancer disappear. You know what I mean? Like I've
Yeah.
seen cancer disappear. And, but it wasn't enough. Like it was, her brain was so invaded.
Mm,
And it was just so strong at that point. So we're leading into July. Everything seems okay. Like we're having a great summer. And, August 30th was her birthday. She wasn't doing very well. We were seeing her kind of less and less. So we went to go see her, and at this point, she was so weak she couldn't even sit up or open her eyes.
mm,
So we're sitting here and we're singing happy birthday. And I remember, I'm pretty sure I was praying. If not, I was talking to my mom, but I'm pretty sure I was praying. And I was like, just let me see my mom's eyes one more time. And her eyes
mm,
were always the same color as mine, green.
mm.
And I remember when she opened her eyes, it must have been the medicine or something, or maybe it was just because she was on her
Yeah.
last leg of life. When she opened her eyes, they were so much lighter than
Mm,
they were. Like they were almost blue. Like
mm,
they weren't the same color. And I'll never forget that. And we were sitting there, and she was holding my hand, she was holding my sister's hand.
mm.
And this is my chance to apologize to my sister. I'm so sorry that I ever used this over her head, but when we would get into fights, not understanding as a kid, I
Yeah.
would use this over her head and say, well, mom did this for me and she didn't do it for you. And
Yeah.
I'm about to tell you what it was. But really, my sister was a lot stronger than me.
Mm, yeah.
Um, and I was so incredibly fragile, especially after this year of the school I was in and everything else.
Mm,
I was so incredibly fragile. And and I know that's why my mom did it. It had nothing to do with favoritism. It had nothing to do with me
mm,
being loved more. It was, she catered to me so much more than my sister. And I know it affected my sister, but that was because of me. That was my fault to say.
Mm.
I was a child, so of course, I'm not,
Yeah.
no child is at fault. But
Yeah.
it was because she knew my sister would be okay, and she had that trust that my sister would be okay. Me, it was always up in the air. Um,
Yeah.
and we're sitting there, and I'm saying, just let me see her eyes one more time. She opened her eyes, and we're crying and crying, crying. And as she closes her eyes, she lifted up my hand, put it to her mouth, and then it just fell back on the bed.
Mm.
And I'm sure my sister was waiting for her to do it. And I'm sure my mother would have done it if she had more
Yeah.
strength. And I'm sure she assumed. She probably went to go lift that hand and realized
Yeah.
she couldn't. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm. Yeah.
um, there's no doubt in my mind that she would have done the same. Um, and so we're sitting there, and it was her birthday, and we sang her happy birthday. And at the time, my brother had me really into singing. My auntie Luann has a beautiful voice, like gorgeous voice, and she was
Mm.
giving me singing lessons. And I wouldn't say I'm the best singer. I'm sure it was more of like an outlet thing. You know what I mean? Like she
Yeah.
loves to sing, so let's just like let her have this outlet. And so I
Yeah.
was singing to my mom, um and then all of a sudden we had a wedding to go to. And
Mm.
so my brother was like, "All right, it's time to go. We got to get on the road." And I felt, now I know it was the Holy Spirit, but I heard somebody say, "It's time." And
Mm.
I was like, "I'm not leaving," because I knew what that meant. I was like, "I'm not
Yeah.
leaving. I can't leave." So my brother being a former Marine, um, it didn't last long, but I was jumping over couches. I was hiding under beds. I was running. I was like, we were in my uncle's house. That's where my mother lived, so that it was a little more quiet, no, not as much stress with the kids and stuff like that. We saw her pretty much
Yeah.
every day, but you know,
Yeah.
that's where she stayed because it was just too much like with all of
Yeah.
us, and like she needed to
Yeah.
heal, to go with healing.
Understandably.
And yes, and so I'm like jumping over couches, doing this, that, the third, and like I'm like, I'm not leaving.
Yeah.
It's like that sound on TikTok. I know it says the F word, but it's like, I'm not leaving. It's like that was me. I was like, I'm not leaving. I was like, I'm not leaving. And so I'm like running. I'm like, no, no, like fighting. Like I'm like, get off me.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going anywhere. And so they literally dragged me out of the house, put me in the car. We're driving up the
Mm.
road. And I'm pretty sure we pull, all of a sudden, my brother pulls off into the only parking lot that there was. And I'm pretty sure it was a funeral home. But
Mm.
I don't remember the building, or it was like a memorial center. I just remember it was something like that. It was such a strange thing.
Mm.
He's on the phone with
Yeah.
my uncle, and he's like, "Okay, okay," and he was like, "Thanks, Uncle Steve." And he hangs up, and he looks up in the rear view mirror. I see his eyes. My brother had these bright blue eyes, and he just looks in the rear view mirror, and he looks at all of us, and he says, "Mom's gone." 30
Mm.
minutes after we left, she passed.
Mm.
And so we get out of the car, we're all distraught. And I was this kid. I was this kid. I saw everyone was distracted, and I didn't want to leave. I
Yeah.
was the one that didn't want to leave. So I
Yeah.
started sprinting in the
Oh
direction
my
that we
gosh.
came because I was like,
Girl.
no, no.
Yeah.
I was like, there's no way, there's no way. So I'm
Yeah.
sprinting, and I don't remember if it was my brother Steven that kind of took me down and
Yeah.
grabbed me, or if it was my brother Michael, but I just remember them holding me so tight
Mm.
because I mean everybody knew I didn't want to
Yeah.
go. I was like, no, I can't go.
Yeah.
Like we can't go.
Yeah.
And it was her birthday. She went home on her birthday, which was a blessing because she
Mm.
wasn't in pain
Wow.
anymore. But
Yeah.
she passed. And I just remember I was so sick. I was struggling at that time with some kind of eating disorder. I kept
Mm.
throwing up like my dinner and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it was just the stress of like my mom
Yeah.
being so sick and like everything that was happening. So that experiencing like that eating disorder while she was sick, right? I was like my
Mm.
belly was bloated. I was so skinny. Like I had the bloated
Yeah.
belly. Um,
Yeah.
like you see like people like kids that aren't getting enough nutrition, their bellies will be bloated. Um,
Yeah.
and I had a little bit of a bloated belly. I was so skinny, so skinny already. And
Yeah.
the next 10 days, I pretty much stayed in my brother's bedroom. His wife, Amanda, at the time, they're not together anymore, but, and I love her still. We keep in contact, and she is such a blessing, such a blessing. Um, but I remember her taking care of me and them both trying to get me to eat. And everything I ate just came right back. I couldn't hold
Mm.
a single thing down. It was like part of me had just been ripped, just
Mm.
completely severed. And I got so much skinnier. And I didn't have anything to lose, you know.
Yeah.
I was so sick and I just remember at one point, and this is when I started to get better, and I told my brother, I was just talking to my mom and I fell asleep in the bed. I was so weak. I only got up to go to the bathroom. Like I wasn't playing,
Mm.
I wasn't doing anything. I was
Yeah.
so sick, like physically just ripped to
Yeah.
pieces. Um, at 11, I just turned 11 2 months prior, you know, and I was just
Mm.
destroyed. And I remember I was sleeping, and then all of a sudden I felt somebody go like this. And at
Mm.
the time, I thought it was my mom,
Mhm.
but I look back now and I know that that was the Holy Spirit. And I mean, I felt somebody like grab my hand. Because when I woke up, my hand
Mm.
was like I could feel that I was holding someone's hand. And I looked and my hand was
Yeah.
like that. And I was
Yeah.
just gripping it and it was squeezing me. And then all of a
Mm.
sudden it left. And that's when I started to get better, was at that
Mm.
moment. And I told my brother, I said, I think mom was holding my hand. And I don't know, I'll find out when I was in heaven if it was her or the Holy Spirit, but I can only assume, you know,
Yeah.
based on what we know with scripture, I can only assume that it was the Holy
Yeah.
Spirit. And it could have been both of them,
Mm.
you know, they could have been together. He could have brought her with him and just
Mm.
let her hold my
Yeah.
hand. And I started to health-wise get better. And my father at the time lived all the way in South Carolina. He was married to my stepmom.
Mm.
They were moving there anyway. I'm sure that's also why he was okay with us staying with my mom and like us not being ripped from family right away. He was like, let's just wait and they'll have a new beginning here.
Yeah.
And so then a few weeks later, it wasn't long, it was maybe like 2 weeks. Um, I don't remember if it was 2 weeks in total or 2 weeks after I started getting better. I can't remember, but like I wasn't good.
Mhm.
And they could have also extended it and been like, let's just wait like another week because like she's not okay
Yeah.
to like, you know, I don't
Yeah.
know. And it could have also depended on my other siblings. I don't remember. Um, I just remember
Mm.
being so sick. And so then my father came and picked us all up in his white little Mitsubishi, crammed us all in the car. Um, and at that point, my brother Stephen was in college, and that's not his dad. My dad was his
Mm.
stepdad. Um,
Yeah.
and so it was just me, my brother Matthew, and my sister Stephanie. And we're all in the car. And we started our journey to South Carolina. And
Mm. Wow.
mm, so I was
That is
11 when she passed, and now we're
so young.
on the way to a completely different part of the US. And this was
Yeah.
before Northerners started moving heavily down to the
Yeah.
Carolinas, because that happened
Yeah.
later. That big, you know that being where you're from, and
Yeah. Yeah.
um, we're
It's gotten
very
even
prevalent.
heavier now.
Yes, it's very prevalent now. Like you guys are used to
Yeah.
us now being around.
Yeah.
But when we
Yeah.
first moved, this was 2008, and we moved to, the coast of South Carolina in the Myrtle Beach, North Myrtle Beach, Cherry Grove area, and it was. This is where I think the devil really like honed in on
Mm,
rejection.
yeah.
Once we arrived there, we didn't go into school right away. We, had a little bit of time to like acclimate and things like
Yeah.
that. But
I mean, and also you didn't go, you didn't come to North Carolina. You went to South Carolina,
it
which
is
even in North
completely
Carolina,
different.
we're like, no, but they're Southern. Like here, you've got a little
They,
bit of grace, but over
yeah,
there, it's like you have that more authentic Southern, all of that. And so to come
they,
from New
and in
York,
and in 2008, they were so closed off to any other culture. And
yeah,
I have some of my best friends are from South Carolina, so I'm not going to sit here and say like there aren't amazing people, but especially during that time period, they were like oblivious to any other culture. They
yeah,
did not want any other culture there. Um,
mm,
you know, it was
yeah,
it was just there was so much tension.
yeah.
So when we started
And I also just
school, yeah, go ahead.
real quick, I just want to say,
Yeah,
you just a few seconds ago or a minute ago mentioned you were 11. Like, let's
yeah,
pause and look at the fact that you went through so much and you were just barely entering pre-teenage phase.
yeah.
Like 12, you're
I
considered like
hadn't
a
even
preteen.
gotten a period yet. I was still
Yeah.
like,
And that's a lot. That's a lot of
yeah,
not only like a lot to endure, but that's a lot of pain to
yeah,
process at such a young age. And like all of the things we've already talked about. So, yeah, go ahead, continue because now we're entering what you said where the rejection just kind of got a little bit more
yes.
prominent.
It was very, very, very prominent. My father, again, I love him and God has restored our relationship. I actually hope he doesn't watch this podcast because I feel like it might, I don't want it to hurt his feelings, but I'm going to tell the truth and I'm going to share my testimony. And um, I don't want it to hurt his feelings though, because we are past that. You know what I mean? Like we're past these things now.
Yeah.
And I love him so much. But let me start with what happened at school. We first got there, and I first day of school. Okay. Um, in New York, we don't say yes, ma'am, no, sir. Um, we have a very casual version of what politeness is. We speak
Mm,
very casually. Um, like I remember in elementary school when we had the switch, we could no longer call our after school teachers Miss Tammy. We had to call her Miss Smith. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like we had to refer to her by her last name. So that was like
Yeah. Yeah.
how chill. We would just be like, oh, Miss Teresa. And half the time we didn't even say Miss. We would just be like Teresa. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
different, like very different
Yeah.
culture. The things we harped on was when you did call you know um someone by their last name, like for example, my maiden name is Pacheco. If I said Miss Pacheco, if I was married and you didn't say Mrs., they would correct you. So if you
No,
said
yeah.
Miss Pacheco, they would say, no, it's Mrs. Pacheco. And like that was like the
Yeah.
things that people harped on with stuff like that. So in the
Yeah.
South,
Like
we'd
I
get
got married, I
there.
got my man.
Yes, yes, yes. And
Make
so
sure you
like
acknowledge.
yes, and it was like the family dynamic was where we placed our
Mm.
like politeness and things of that nature. Because, a lot of Italians, I'm Portuguese, things like that. We were like,
Yeah.
you need to know that like I'm in a family. I am not a miss, I'm a Mrs. and or I'm,
Yeah.
um I am senior so and so. I'm not junior. Like, you know what I mean? Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like the family dynamic, we very heavily. Um, Not that the South doesn't have their own version of that because they do, but it was just different. And
Yeah.
so I get there first day of school. I am there and the teacher is asking me, how do you say your last name? And she's saying Pacheco, Pachinio, like I'm like, where'd the N
Oh my
come
goodness.
from? Like she just
Oh my
couldn't say
gosh.
it. And so I said, it's
Yeah.
Pachico. And she said Pachico. And I said, yeah, Pachico. And she looks at me and she said, what did you say? And I said, yeah. And she said, one more
Oh my
time. And she's like, Matt, like I don't understand. Like I don't
oh
understand.
my
Why is she
god.
upset? And I said yes. And I'm looking at her like,
Yeah.
I don't know what
Oh,
she
she's
wants.
interpreting this with
Yes.
attitude.
Yeah, she thinks that I'm being disrespectful and I'm not
Yeah.
addressing her. And I did not know about the yes ma'am, no ma'am. Like I had no
Yeah.
knowledge of it.
Oh
And so
girl.
I said yes, and she slams on the desk. That's it. You say yes ma'am, no ma'am. Get out of my classroom. Go to the
Mm.
principal's office. And I said,
Yeah, first day.
yeah, and I said, ma'am, where's the principal's office? And then she thinks I'm being smart, like
Oh my god.
she's thinking I'm like, ma'am,
I
and I'm
I
not doing
can't.
that. I'm just like,
Oh.
so and so she's like, get out of my class, don't be smart. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. I'm now standing in the hallway. I've been pushed out of the classroom, and I'm like, okay. So I'm
Yeah.
trying to be this charismatic young girl that I've always been. And I was like, problem solved. I knock on another teacher's door and I said, hey, it's my first day. My teacher wanted me to go to the principal's office. I don't know where to go. And so they showed
Yeah.
me where to go. And I get in there and he's like, why did it take you so long? I was like, sir, I didn't know where your office was. This is my first day.
Uh,
Like, I didn't know.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
he's like, okay. And he's like super upset with me already. Like,
No.
we're just sitting in this man's office, and he says, why didn't you say yes, ma'am, no, ma'am? And I said, and now I'm like overusing it. I'm like, sir, I didn't know. And he said, what do you mean you
Yeah.
didn't know? And I'm like, I didn't know. And he said, young lady, I'm going to give you the chance to tell the truth. If you were upset, you just got to let me know, but like, you can't have an attitude. He's like, da 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 da. And I'm like, sir, I didn't know. And he said, if you keep lying to me, I'm going to call your father. And I said, please
uh,
call my dad. Like, call my dad. I'm so confused. Like, I don't know what's happening. And so he like picks up the phone all mad. And he's like, my God, so disrespectful. He's like, saying I'm just being disrespectful and like, I'm going to be in so much trouble. Calls my dad. Hi, Mr. Pacheco. How are you doing, sir? He's like, I'm fine. He's like, I have your daughter Stacie in here. She's being relatively disrespectful. She's telling me that she didn't know to say this. And he's like, oh my God, like what would she do? Like, and I
yeah.
was not like, I wasn't one to get in
Gosh.
trouble. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. So he's like,
he's like, it's her first day. What could she have possibly done on her first day? And, my dad was pretty understanding, even if I did do something bad, because like my mom had just
yeah.
died, like I'm still
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and I'm just like waiting because they didn't put them on speaker back then, but my dad's loud so I can hear him talking. And he's like, she didn't say yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. She's saying that you guys don't do that up there, and I know that can't be true, sir. So I just want to clear things up. He's like, Matt. And he said, oh, shoot. Only he said the other word. He said, I am so sorry. He said, I forgot to tell her before she left for school. And he said, sir, she's telling the truth. We don't do that up there.
Oh,
And
gosh.
so his jaw, like, as he's on the phone, he looks at me, he goes, like, just
Yeah.
dumbfounded. And
Like,
so he said, all right. He said, I'll talk to her teacher. And
oh
so he
my
hangs up and
gosh.
he's like, then he looks at me, he's like, you guys really don't? And I said, no, sir.
Oh my god.
And so not
Oh
only
my
that, but
gosh.
like none of the kids had met me yet. Now I'm being
Uh,
labeled as a bad kid. And I'm
I was
like,
about to say, like, that was a public execution on the first day.
yes, like, oh my God, I was ostracized. Excuse me, not oh my goodness. But I was ostracized and I had to go back in there. And then she's asking me all these questions. Well, what is it like up there? And like,
No,
she's
we're
like,
not friends. I'm
yeah. And
sorry.
I was, well, I just kind of, I was like, well, I'm like just such, I was such a sweet kid that I was like,
No, I agree, but I
well,
just
you know, I'm
inside
like,
I would be like,
yeah. And well, I was scared at this point. I was like, I will answer every question that this woman asked me. I am absolutely terrified at this
yeah.
point. And so she's asked me, she said, that's all right. You're just a Yankee. We'll get you right. She literally called me a Yankee, like to my face. And like she would call
Oh,
me a Yankee for like most of that year. She just referred to me as a Yankee. She'd be like, all right, Yankee. And like, she thought
oh
it
my
was funny. And I was like,
gosh.
I didn't know till later that that was a slur, for
Yeah,
Northern people. I didn't know. And so I was just like, okay, I didn't tell my parents nothing because I didn't know.
you're like minimal
And
conflict as possible.
yes, and I'm just like, and I didn't understand that like Southern women were taught to be quiet. And that meant young girls too. And it's definitely
Mm,
gotten better as the years have went on, but this is 2008. It's not even 2009 yet, like we're still in 2008. So I'm being spunky, like I'm from New York. People are
yeah,
asking me all these questions, and upstate New York isn't very city, but like we're very charismatic. Like we'll talk to
yeah,
anybody. We're, for the most part, like once we're connected, we're gonna talk to you. We're gonna be respectful, but we
yeah,
also don't really do like the whole Southern politeness. So I didn't catch on to like the cues of they don't want to talk to me because I remember in first grade, right? This is just how we were in that area. There was this girl, and her and I would beef sometimes. And I looked at her and I said, Kayla, let's be real. You don't like me. I don't really like you either. We don't have to be friends, but we can still be nice to each other. And that's literally what I said to this girl. This is like first, second
yeah,
grade.
yeah.
So, like, this is how I'm talking to these people. Just like super forward, super
Oh,
like, and like, I'm telling them why. They're like, oh, so why are you here? And really, I didn't understand that they're just being polite and that's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
I didn't know. I thought that they were
yeah.
genuinely interested. So I'm
And so
like,
you're spewing.
I'm like trying to be myself. I'm like, oh, I guess they like me, And I'm like,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden, like a week or two goes by, and one of them got so frustrated that she said to another girl, and then I heard her say it. And they said, my God, like, and this is just me quoting it. They said, my God, I bet you annoyed your mother to death. Like, and
Oh.
that's why she passed away,
Mm,
is what
mm.
they said. And I just,
That just.
and I had never like been spoken to
Mm,
that way.
yeah.
And I was like, I'm annoying.
Mm,
I was like, I'm aggravating. I was
yeah.
like, like
Mm.
I was like, oh my God. Um,
And just out of curiosity, did they know that your mother had passed
yeah,
when
I
they said
told
that?
them. Yep, I told
Okay.
them. Hmm.
Yeah.
And they
That's
said
just
it
nice.
with the implication of, I bet your mom died because you annoyed her to death. That's
No,
how it
yeah.
was said. And so I just like
That.
felt this heavy weight again of rejection, of who I was.
Yeah.
And so I kind of went into my own shell and wasn't, I've never been good at being quiet. So
Yeah.
I was still a talkative girl, but I just kind of would shut down. And
Yeah.
that's when the
Yeah.
bullying started. And when I was younger, I actually had a very heavy lisp. And I still have like a little bit of one, but
Yeah.
I remember in seventh grade, there was this group of kids and they did not like me. It was kind of the same group of people that, it had been. And this boy, um, his name was Ernie. He looked at me and he literally spit on me. And
Mm.
then he said, "Say it, don't spray it." And I was just I wasn't even talking to him. He just happened to be like in nearby, and maybe I did. I don't
Yeah.
know. I was a kid. I had a list, so it was very possible. Or he could have just been being mean, which he was
Yeah.
still being mean regardless. I was talking
Yeah.
to my friend, oh my God, what was her name? Elaney. I have her name somewhere in a book in my big vat of like yearbooks and stuff like that. She was my best friend at school at the time. And she was from New York, so like her and I clicked right off the bat.
Yeah.
And she looked at him and she was like, "Shut up, Ernie," and like she was like ready to fight him. And
Yeah.
but that was like just another like
Mm.
just hit. Like I wasn't even talking to
Yeah.
him, and it was just
Yeah.
like boom. And while all of this is happening at home, my father, he really struggled with his anger and things got physical often. I do believe that he tried his best now that I've talked to him and things like that. But he did not, patience was not a virtue that he possessed. So I'm getting rejected there and at home. And I do think he struggles with some, like, it probably has to do with how he grew up, but he has some narcissistic tendencies. And he would kind of categorize us as kids, and I always felt like I was like kind of the take-all kid. That's how I felt
Yeah.
growing up. And my sister would be like, "Just stay quiet, like don't fight him back." But a lot of it could have been the confidence that my mom kind of
Yeah.
instilled in me when I was younger was like, "No, this isn't okay. He shouldn't be doing that, or he shouldn't have done that." Like,
Yeah.
and so I would keep pressing. And this is where I
Yeah.
started to get defensive and press when I was feeling
Yeah.
that rejection as I would press. This is where that like pushing back started to happen, like the getting angry and the constantly pressing into situations and stuff like that, which
Yeah.
was probably difficult to deal with. But all of this is happening, and then I come home and I can't do anything right. I'm getting smacked around sometimes. And as I got older, that only got worse. And we are now kind of entering into high school, middle school, like,
Thank you so much for listening to What God Has Done with My Pain. If you are interested in helping me spread light and truth of what God can do with pain, go to givebutter.com/what God has done with my pain, so the podcast may continue to sustain future episodes. As always, a huge shout out to Lazuli for her song No Greater Love, which you can find on Spotify. And you can find Lazuli on Instagram at Lazuli, PROJ. Swing by What Way This Way on Instagram to catch some behind the scenes snippets. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss a single interview. Meantime, I would love to hear from you on social media or email. Until next time.